Hi folks, welcome to episode 102 of the Epochs of the Lotus Eaters. I'm joined by Bo, and we are going to be talking about part 2 of the Assyrians, the great villains of history. We went through in the first part of the sort of origin, survival, and turbulent first 1,000 years of the Assyrian state. And after the Bronze Age collapsed, the Assyrians realized that basically they're the only power in the region with any chops. And so they start, expanding and extending their reach. Because, I mean, Assyria, as we covered last time, it's in an insecure position. It can be invaded from anywhere. So you've got to maintain a strong military if you want to have an independent state in this region. And they realized that actually we have a stronger military than everyone else. And we are not afraid to use it. And so they did a lot. And this is the real sort of golden age of the Assyrian Empire, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, it's called by historians. But the Assyrians wouldn't have recognized any difference. They, there's a standard continuity. We've always been here, sort of thought they would have had. But yeah, this is their golden age, really, where they really start putting the boot in and grinding everyone down under their heels because they can. It's literally the only reason as well. Right, so where are we beginning?
Yeah, one of a few golden ages. We said that in the last one. That
this is the really great one.
Yeah, when they're I would say the very last one. It's one of the things. If you looked at it on a graph, it goes up and down, and the Assyrian Empire it hits the absolute height just before it falls off a cliff and does a dead cat bounce.
It does, but there are internal structural problems with the empire at that point. Whereas at this point, they haven't emerged yet, and so the average Assyrian subject is thinking, we're going to do this forever. We are the gold standard of everything. We have the best of everything. We control everywhere. No one's going to beat us, and that's going to be the same for my children and my grandchildren and their grandchildren. And so at this point, this is the best time in history to be an Assyrian.
We are the inheritors of the Sumerians and the Akkadians, of all civilization, really. Our god Ashur hasn't been beaten.
Yeah, he reigns supreme
in like
over all
1,400 years or something. So we're going to talk about sort of the early portion of the Neo-Assyrians. But as you pointed out, a really good point I hadn't thought of making, but it's a great point, is that that's a completely artificial Western 19th, 20th century thing to say, here's the Middle Assyrians and here's the Neo-Assyrians. As far as they were concerned, it was all one continuous thing. Even though their empire would ebb and flow, wax and wane.
That's just the nature of empire.
That's an artificial historian's thing to call it the Neo-Assyrians.
But it's not wrong. It's not wrong to do. So we need to.
It's fine to do it, of course.
Exactly. we it allows you to identify different periods conveniently. But of course, they just saw themselves as the one contiguous civilization, and rightly so, because they were.
So let's talk about some of the golden ages and retractions from that. So we talked last time about Tiglath-Pileser I, and he is one of the earlier or in the middle portion of the Assyrian story. He's one of the high watermarks. But after him, fairly soon after him, it sort of takes a downward tick. And so what I wanted to do before we start talking about one of the other really, really big, important, one of the standout kings, Tiglath-Pileser III, I wanted to do a little bit of a 5-10 minute montage-ish through the intervening period.
Okay. Before we start, what year are we roughly beginning at?
Okay, well, I wanted to talk. Well, Tiglath-Pileser I, if you believe all the king lists and things,
which we do unironically,
dies in 1076 BC. And Tiglath-Pileser III comes in what is it, the 745?
Yeah.
So I want to do 250 odd, 300 odd years there. Sort of get through that in sort of 5, 10, 15 minutes. Talk about that 300 odd years. And a lot happens, but, even with 2 or even 3 episodes of Epochs, even with quite a few hours to play with here, we still have to...
it's 300 years of complex political history.
Yeah, still have to. And, again, just to mention, it's obvious to say, but our sources aren't completely extant, and we haven't got loads of information about all these people. But Tiglath-Pileser III, we do actually. And then his son, Sargon II, I've heard it said we've got the most sources on, even more than the biblical Sennacherib and Ashurbanipal, probably the most famous one, arguably. So in this period, it's a bit much to call it a dark age, but we still don't have just endless amounts of information.
No, but we are coming off the sort of civilizational hangover that was the Bronze Age collapse.
Right. Yes, so, that's right. Yeah.
You know, this is just the period just before sort of the Greek Dark Ages as well. So, you know, like civilization is a low ebb across the entire known world at this point.
Yeah, Tiglath-Pileser I is fairly soon after the Bronze Age collapse. Again, that doesn't have a very, very neat boundary. This is the day the Bronze Age collapse ended, or anything like that, obviously. But he's pretty much soon. He's pretty much straight after. His reign, I think, started in 1114 BC, which is a generation two at most.
And it's entirely likely that this was just a period of chaos. Absolute
chaos. Seems to be. Yeah, that's what it seems to be.
People, privation, roaming massed bands of barbarian, raw meat-eating barbarians, and just like entire civilizations have collapsed into dust. And so it must have been quite a concerning time if you're the king of a small kingdom that's isolated in, not near any trade routes now, not near the ocean. You don't have any secure allies. Everything is in flux. It must have been pretty terrifying.
Yeah, they think that possibly during the Bronze Age collapse that I think I said in the last Epochs that the Assyrians, in a grand sweeping sense, turtled up.
Yeah,
they reduced their empire to not much more than a little strip of land along the Tigris.
Yeah, literally the heartland.
Yeah, just that. One account I heard saying that some of the, not necessarily the sea peoples, but just the more barbaric peoples closer to central and northern Iraq were even camping their tents almost at the gates of Ashur.
Yeah. Can you even imagine?
So it's funny in history when great, amazing cities finally fall, like Constantinople to the Ottomans, or Rome to Brennus, or
the Vandals and the Goths.
When they do finally go, even though they're sort of the baddies sometimes, it is sort of sad.
Yeah.
Because it's got such a long history.
There's such majesty accumulated in the civilization that to have a bunch of deerskin tented barbarians outside of the great gates of your city, you've really dropped the ball here. This should never have happened. You should have 100,000 men at arms to just stomp them. And if you don't, well, that's your fault.
Like when Napoleon burnt Moscow. There's loads of examples, aren't there? There's just tons and tons of examples. When Alexander
is it Persepolis?
Screwed over Persepolis. Yeah.
The Persians shouldn't have let this happen. But anyway,
that's a story for another time. Definitely. Okay, so Tiglath-Pileser I, sort of, just to recap super quick.
Yeah.
After the Bronze Age collapse, he's one of the first that realizes, I can actually just go around on a circuit almost of our borders and expand out again.
Yeah.
Because no one can touch us. And so the next 100 or 200 or years or so, we've got the king lists, and we've got names, and we know some of the detail, and they, as a broad theme, as a broad trend, they keep expanding outwards. But there's no sort of really, really impressive king that stands out as having achieved huge amounts until we get up to one called Ashur-dan II. And Ashur-dan II is one of those ones who seems to have reformed the army slightly, just done very well, rather than sort of holding on or consolidating what he had, actually pushing the boundaries out significantly. So he's one of those. There's after him, we've got Adnan Nirari II.
I love these names. They're just so alien.
Yeah, right. And again, he we're looking at a period where the central power of the king is becoming less absolute. Now, this story plays out in history lots and lots of times, doesn't it? When you've got a big kingdom, unless your ability to rule is extremely good, extremely tight, shall we say, or if you don't have a bureaucracy, some sort of system under you that keeps it all in check, your magnates, the lords under you, will probably start at some point trying to become overpowerful.
Yes.
There's so many examples of this. I'll just to mention one, the age of King John and his barons.
Yeah.
They realise, well, you're weak and we can raise almost as many men as you.
Yeah.
And so why is there an absolute monarchy even? Do we need that anymore? That sort of thing. Seems like something like this starts playing out for the first time in the Assyrian Empire. It gets a lot worse in a bit later. But it seems that at some point around here, that sort of dynamic starts happening.
And it's probably worth remembering that the Assyrians are still operating the mold of the sort of ancient Sumerians and Akkadians. So conquering a kingdom doesn't necessarily mean overthrowing their king. It means forcing their king into vassalage. And okay, it might be just one city that you're bringing a king into bondage in, but still he's his own man in his own domain that is paying fealty to you. And so you've got a power center there that could create a coalition against you or something like that. It's not like the Ottomans and their sort of satraps, or the Persians and their satraps. Because I mean, speaking of sort of medieval Europe, I was reading recently about the medieval French view of the Ottomans, and they saw their own system of feudalism as a system of freedom, because the king actually wasn't just able to replace governors as he chose, whereas of course the Ottoman Sultan was able to, because no one actually, they were there purely at the pleasure of the Sultan. And so the entire civilization of the Ottoman Empire seemed like a giant tyranny to the medieval Europeans, which is a very interesting way of putting it, because of course now in the moderns we look at feudalism as a form of tyranny, which is just very interesting how they thought they were the free ones compared to the Turk. But yeah, so it would have been something similar to a sort of feudalistic system with the Assyrian Empire, right?
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that. Just the other day, I was reading something where from the age of Henry VIII, where the Turkish Sultan is just shorthand for absolute tyranny.
Yeah, he's shorthand for Hitler.
Right, yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, the most evil thing you could do was pledge your fealty to the Turkish Sultan. Yeah. It's like so insane that you might dream of doing such a thing.
I mean, Turk was just synonymous with slave or tyrant.
Yeah.
It's quite mad, actually. I mean, I'm sure they had their reasons, don't get me wrong.
Right, yeah, well, yeah. And just backward. Or, of course, being Muslim. One more layer of sort of horror from the Christian mind.
Yeah, foreignness and weirdness and badness.
Yeah. Sitting in the Christian city, Constantinople, they would still think in the age of Henry VIII. It's not long ago they took it. Okay, back to the Assyrians. We then get Ashurbanipal II, and you mentioned him in the last one. He's that sadistic one. Well, they're all sadistic, but he's that particularly sadistic one. He said he burnt the adolescent girls and boys of his enemies and cut their hands off, put their eyes out, all sorts of things. Yeah,
he's like proto-Sauron.
Yeah. But he oversaw a period, his reign, of sort of extreme expansion. Sort of couldn't stop winning. One of those guys, like Alexander, just couldn't stop.
He's just the most evil man on earth, but he can't stop winning.
Yeah. So he is a standout one. Ashurbanipal II.
Ashurnasirpal.
Ashurnasirpal II. After him, there's Shalmaneser III, who's also sort of stands out a bit because he had a good, strong reign. But right at the end of his life, and whether his own death was wrapped up in this, we're not entirely sure, but right at the end of his life and going into the reign of his children, there seems to have been massive revolts across the entire Assyrian Empire, the entire Assyrian world. But by this point, I put maps up and things. By this point, it is quite big. I mean, we're talking, they haven't taken Babylon yet, but it's sort of all of central and northern modern day Iraq, big chunks of Syria, even big chunks of Armenia and Iran, down into the Levant, modern day Jordan, Lebanon, that area.
Yeah.
So it's really quite big.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably the biggest empire the world's ever seen in terms of just surface area.
Yeah.
By that point already.
And one thing I find interesting about it is just how omnidirectional it is. It's just like, look, there are people around us who aren't under our control. We've got to deal with this. You know, we'll just go and stamp on them. And just to presage what I think is like the end point. But it strikes me that people like the Persians and the Macedonians had a lot more of an easy time conquering the Middle East because of the work the Assyrians do now, which is essentially pummeling everyone into submission. And it really is, as you said with Ashurnasirpal, it's just brutalizing everyone around them into being like, no, you are just going to be our serfs. You're just going to deal with it, and we don't care, and we're going to kill you if you don't. We're going to kill you, your children, the animals in your city, then we'll burn it all to the ground, and we'll show everyone else this is what we do. We'll put up a big statue with a big carving on it saying this is what we did to you if you don't just shut up and do as we say. And this like literally like 1,000 years of brutalization is why I think that the Persians and the Macedonians had actually such an easy time accumulating such a massive empire.
Yeah, I can absolutely believe that, because we mentioned in the last one as well, just to say, the Assyrians had a policy of deporting or resettling peoples, breaking them up, breaking their tie to the land, and all that sort of thing, which is very successful.
It works really, really well.
Yeah, if you do that, it will probably work quite well if you do it wholeheartedly.
Yeah. If you're not ashamed in any way of doing it, then it totally works.
Yeah, like Stalin deported lots and millions of people.
Yeah.
To absolutely break their will.
Yeah.
In on a sort of ethnic level.
Yeah. And it totally works. It's just really, really evil.
You're right. Yeah.
It's just I mean I don't want to understate just how phenomenally evil. I mean, this is one of the things that in the Old Testament there are great screeds against the Assyrians where I can't remember which book it's in, but it's like, oh Assyria, when you fall, no one's going to weep for you. And it's like, yeah, no, that's right. No one's going to weep for them. Yeah. They probably knew this as well.
When they screwed we'll talk about it in the next episode when we talk about Sennacherib and the kingdom of Judah and the Israelites.
Yeah, that's
of course
where it comes in.
The Hebrews are good at holding a grudge. They are quite good at that. In their
defense, though, I think it's fairly justified.
Didn't say it wasn't justified, but they do say, you're going to get your just desserts, and no one's going to weep over when it happens to you, and when you get ground into the dust.
And they were right about that.
Can't wait till it happens.
I don't blame them.
Right? Yeah, no, I don't blame them particularly. No, yeah.
But anyway, so
Shalmaneser. After Shalmaneser,
what happens at the end of Shalmaneser's life? Does he lose the empire? Or?
Right. Well, no, he doesn't lose the empire. We don't know exactly how he dies.
Right.
But it does seem that either right at the very, very end of his life, or certainly as soon as his sons take over, there's some sort of empire-wide civil war, civil strife, internal strife of some type. The story of Shalmaneser the third's death, and then the people that take over from him, is actually a story that plays out a few times in the Assyrian story, but also just in all of history.
Yeah.
Where you've got multiple sons, and you pick a younger son to inherit, and the older sons don't like that. They don't take kindly to that.
Well, maybe if you were more competent, I would have picked you.
Right. Yeah. Because if you've got the oldest son and he is the best, then it's just going to be a no-brainer.
Yeah.
But what if your oldest son is too entitled? I'm thinking of William the Conqueror and his eldest son, Robert Curthose.
Yeah.
If the oldest boy is sort of too entitled and just evil or something, is not fit to rule, and you as the old man, as the king, sees it, and is like, no, you're the third or fourth son is noble of character and intelligent.
Or just militarily competent.
Right.
Whatever it is.
Just a better choice for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So it seems that something like that happened, and Shalmaneser III picked a younger son. We think. All this is a little bit we think.
This is all, take it all with a pinch of salt, because the records are not great from, 3,000 years ago.
Now, this exact story, as I already said, was played out throughout all of history. That story plays out right at the very, very end, really the end of the whole Assyrian story, is one of those.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the grandest examples of ever, actually, and that's for next time. But something like that happens here. So there's some sort of civil war, civil strife, something like that happens, and it massively destabilizes the Assyrian Empire. And so we get a period of 80 years, 100 years, 80 odd years, where the Assyrian Empire shrinks a bit and just becomes a lot weaker. So again, if it were on a chart, it sort of flatlines or even goes down a bit even, right? And what we see is the sort of central authority get sort of very weak. In fact, some historians have called it the age of the magnates. And it seems that maybe the Assyrian kings became figureheads, puppets or figureheads,
great noble families.
Yeah. And because it was so large, it was still broken up into various provinces. Bit like the late Roman Empire, the various rulers, leaders who control these pockets of power become pretty much independent. They might still nominally bend the knee to the king back in Ashur or in Nineveh, but for all intents and purposes, in real terms, their power's in their own right. And then, of course, they're going to fight each other and all sorts of things. So it starts getting messy, fracturing, really. It's fracturing.
So you know what we need, though? What we need is a strong king to come along and put some heads on spikes.
Right. Well, just to say real quick, in the middle of that, sort of in the middle of this 80-year period, we do know that there's one king, Adnan-Nihari III, who is sort of an exception.
Right.
And he's, I do want to just mention him just in passing, because he had his mother was extremely strong.
Oh, really?
Whether she was sort of a queen mother type deal. Where she was like an Eleanor of Aquitaine, sort of kingmaker almost type person.
Emma of Normandy.
Shamaramat. So again, there are powerful women in history, even in deep, deep history.
Even in a strictly patriarchal society like this one.
And so, it seems like the aristocratic families of Ashur, just quick to say that the Assyrians moved their capital a fair bit.
They did, didn't
Famously moved it to Nineveh at one point, but that's the tip of the iceberg. Ashur, obviously the original hometown, is sort of was considered also a religious.
Well, it's literally the seat of the god,
right? Yeah.
You know, the temple there is literally where the god lives, and so it's the most sacred. It's like their equivalent of Mecca.
Oh, easily,
like
absolutely.
That's the way to look at it. It's their equivalent of the Vatican City.
Absolutely, that the Assyrians, they are the people of Ashur.
Yeah,
they called their empire, the Assyrian Empire, the land of Ashur.
Yeah.
So it couldn't be more of a Mecca for them.
You can't overstate the importance of this city to the Assyrians.
So in that sense, it was always ground zero. However, different kings moved their court or their political capital, shall we say, all over, to many different places. They founded cities in all, like, completely from scratch. Nimrod was one, Nineveh was one, but there are many others.
Wasn't there
a
like
few others.
Sargon or something?
Yeah, Sargon II, who we'll talk about at the end of this one, moved it as well to another place. Because what we think is that the powerful aristocratic families of Ashur were constantly trying to undermine the king.
Yes.
So it's like, right, well, screw you. I'm going to make a whole new city.
You're not even going to be near the levers of power. That's what they're saying.
Yeah. Again, it's very Assyrian just to say, right, well, I'm just going to do this whole new policy then. Don't really care how much it costs, how destructive it is, how difficult it is. This is the policy now.
None of those things are my problem, actually.
Yeah. I've ordered it, so it's gonna happen. So it seems like they often put eunuchs in charge to be sort of governors, regional governors. The idea is that a eunuch could never actually be the full formal legal king.
Well, he can't be
'Cause-
loyal to his own bloodline, can he?
Right, yeah. He can't have kids
That's
being a eunuch. So
the eunuchs have always, in like lots of different civilizations, always had a point of power because they're not going to have sex with your wives and they're not going to be loyal to their own progeny.
yeah, they're not going to have any progeny.
Exactly.
So, yeah. I mean, there's a character, isn't there, in Game of Thrones?
Yeah, Varys.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, in the Chinese world, eunuchs, there's loads of civilizations.
The model of
over the millennia.
Varys is very, very common in the ancient world.
Yeah. Well, so in the sort of early, in all Neo-Assyrian culture, eunuchs plays a large role. So there's governors that are eunuchs. There's the various aristocratic families, and also leaders of the army, generals, I suppose, or field marshals. They can be absolutely setting themselves up as powers in their own right. Right, so the age of the magnates, so-called, goes on for quite a while. I mean, we're talking decades and decades and decades.
Yeah.
Where a bit like, who was in the age of Charlemagne, where the kings of the palace, the kings...
Charles Martel and the mayors of the palace.
Yeah, the mayors of the palace.
Yeah.
Real power. Whoever gets to set policy, really, that's where the real power is, isn't it?
The executor, is the person with the real power.
Right.
And so you can't really continue to be a figurehead for very long.
It's just like in modern day Britain, the king is the head of state, but he doesn't set any policy. Doesn't set any policy. Yeah. That's the head of government. That's the prime minister. So all the power, the cockpit of power, is at number 10, not at Buckingham Palace. However, the king or queen is the head of state. So anyway, seems like something like that was going on. And there's a figure, Shamshi Liu was a sort of a field commander, a general. Seemed like he and his family were setting policy, were deciding who they're going to attack and when. And so, anyway, in the period between about 820 BC and roughly 745, just before Tiglath-Pileser gets in, there seems to be a period where there's a lot of, it's a messy period. There's no other way to put it. It's a messy period. But it's interesting to note, I think, that the Assyrian, because other cultures, other civilizations could easily have just crumbled and fallen apart at that point. But the Assyrians don't. I think by sheer force and sort of by brute force.
There's a persistence about them, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's a real sort of will that underpins the civilization, which I keep going on. They're very evil. But there is something about them I admire. They went through a very difficult period of human history in a very difficult area. Like if you're playing Civilization, they get a tough start, actually.
Yeah.
It's easy to be overrun from anywhere by anyone. And actually you've got a very distinct lack of resources. And you're not all you've got essentially are men. That's all you've got. So you can grow wheat and grow men. Okay, what now? Well, we're going to have to use them, aren't we?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think in a fair different few examples in history, if you've got a very, very, very strong army, sometimes that's enough. That's all you need. Right. Yeah. I was reading a bit the other day in Churchill's History of English-Speaking Peoples, where he talked about once Oliver Cromwell cut off the head of Charles Stuart, sort of everyone tried to take him out. Yeah, the Scots, the Welsh, the Irish, lots of people, lots of factions within England, other types of Protestant, and the Catholics.
But Cromwell had the new model army, and they didn't.
Everyone turned on him, like in a game of Risk, when everyone suddenly realizes, you're going to win next turn if we don't all gang up on you.
Yeah,
that sort of happened to Oliver Cromwell, and Churchill was like, and he beat them all.
Yeah,
and he just beat them all because his army was too good. It was just too good. Too powerful.
And he was a good commander.
And that's all that mattered.
Yeah.
He didn't need Parliament anymore. He's just going to dissolve that then. Yeah. I'm just going to cut off the head of the king, dissolve Parliament, and beat everyone. Because my army's too good.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. That's the realpolitik of the situation, sort of thing. Yeah. So it seems like something like that is what saved the Assyrian Empire in this period, is that their army was just too good. It's the best around. However, when this Shamshi Liu dies, we don't have all the details, seems like there's some sort of a period of revolt again, because there is no strong monarchy.
Well, this is entirely the problem of having the great man, though, because the great man eventually dies,
Right.
and everyone realizes, well, you're not him.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.